thirst quenching moment. A thirst quenching moment. Now my thesis is, I believe every person who calls themselves a born-again believer should be thirsty for the things of God. However, that's the antithesis. Sadly, though, those of us who call ourselves Christians often chase after the things of this world in hopes of quenching our thirst and becoming fulfilled and satisfied. Now, I often hear the young people, they have all of this slang these days, and thirsty is a slang, if I get it right? Thirsty. They walk around and they say, she thirsty or he thirsty. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. You got a young brother that comes up to a young sister and says, hey, what's up? You sure looking good today. You looking real good. Can I get that number? Yo, can I get those digits? Yo, you gonna let me get that number? And what she say under her breath? Thirsty. Thirsty. I'm about to tell you what it means. What it means in layman's terms and young people terms is that person was desperate. Desperate. Kept asking over and over again because he wanted the number. That's in street terms. It means desperate, wanting, or needing something. But if we were to look at the meaning of the word thirsty, we would find that it is an adjective, descriptive, feeling a need to drink something. Just by looking at someone, you can't tell that they are thirsty. They don't carry a sign around with them saying, I'm thirsty. It is an inner craving. It is an inner need. I'm a little thirsty right now, but you can't look at me by telling. Can you just see me right now? Can you look at me and tell I'm thirsty? No, because it is an inner need. In our text today, we see two stories that John included back to back that help us define those who are thirsty for God. It appears that what they had been previously drinking was not quenching their thirst. So we see the story of Nicodemus in John chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. Nicodemus, he was a ruler of the Jews. He knew who he was. He was a socially prominent figure. He was a religious leader. He was upper class and wealthy. He was highly educated. One would say that Nicodemus had it going on. Yet he was thirsty. He sought out Christ under the cover of darkness, looking for that thirst-quenching moment. And then John tells us about our focal story, the woman at the well. John 4, 6 through 15. Verse 6, 7 says, it was about the 6th hour that came a woman of Samaria. Now the 6th hour, this would be high noon. The rest of the women, they would go to the well early as a group. But this woman went alone. Now she was a woman, we understand that. She was a Samaritan. She was an enemy of the Jews, for verse 9 tells us that the Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. She was an outsider. She also knew who she was. She had had 5 husbands, and she now had a boyfriend. She was what appeared to be an obvious sinner. But she too, like Nicodemus, was thirsty. But as we will soon see, this woman had a thirst-quenching moment. I believe what John was in effect demonstrating here is that anyone who has not had an up-close and personal encounter with Jesus will remain thirsty and unsatisfied until they come to accept him as their Lord and Savior. From the rich, upper class, prominent people to the poor, outcast enemies of God. From the religious elites to the social misfits. From those who seek Christ out in the cover of darkness to those who meet him in broad daylight in the well. Everyone from the super religious to the sacrilege religious, from the high up to the low down, from the whole to the broken. We all at one point were thirsty until we drank from the well of salvation. The Samaritan woman is extremely thirsty when she arrives at the well of Jacob, where Jesus is sitting. Through her conversation with Jesus, we learn that she is unable to satisfy her deep thirst despite going through 5 men and currently being involved with another. You see, the symptoms of a thirsting soul will make you go to person after person after person to fill the emptiness. This woman was real thirsty and was seeking something or someone to satisfy her thirst. She sought love. The Bible says she was married 5 times and currently living with a man who was not her husband. She sought acceptance. She had to travel to get the water alone because of her embarrassment. Typically, women journeyed together early in the morning before the heat of midday to get the water. But she was alone, and it was noon, the hottest time of the day. She was a woman with a bad reputation. She wasn't welcomed among the so-called respectable women in the village. They didn't like her, and my guess is that she didn't like what they said about her. During biblical times, drawing water and chatting at the well was the social high point of a woman's day. However, this woman was ostracized and marked as immoral, an unmarried woman living openly with a man that was not her husband. Come on. Yes, this was her life, and it was messy, and she knew it. Her life had been a series of failures through which she pursued an ever more intangible satisfaction for the emptiness she felt inside. Many people probably thought it was lust. Others may have thought her as a loose woman. And yeah, they had reason for thinking this way. I'm sure she would admit at times she had given them reasons for thinking that way. But her reputation was not simply a matter of hormones or poor choices. Come on. No, it was a kind of thirst that no matter what she did, it never went away. A thirst so deep that in her desire to quench, it caused her to pursue relationships with the worst of the lot and then drive them away. No one could satisfy this woman's thirst. That is not until she met Jesus at the well. As this woman approached this well, I can imagine her rolling her eyes, saying, man, I thought nobody was going to be at the well. I came here at the hottest point of the day on purpose. I didn't want to see anybody. All I wanted to do was just fill my water jug and go home. Come on. And now not only is someone sitting at the well, but it's a man. Now understand, it wasn't that unusual for a man to be at the well. Men would often stop there for something to drink. What was unusual was a man striking up a conversation with a woman, especially a woman like her. After all, she was a Samaritan. So a little bit of history at this point probably would serve us well. Just want to give you just the relationship between the Jews and the Samaritans. At the time of Jesus' earthly ministry, the land of Samaria was situated between the regions of Galilee in the north, of Israel and Judea in the south. Jewish travelers would take the longer 6-day journey all the way around the Jordan River between Galilee and Judea rather than taking a shorter, more direct route through Samaria. The Jews avoided all contact with the Samaritans because of the bitter history between them and the Samaritans. After the death of King Solomon, the 12 tribes of Israel split into 2 kingdoms, the north and the south. 10 tribes belonged to the northern kingdom, and 2 kingdoms belonged to the southern kingdom. Based on Israel's continued disobedience, God allowed their enemies, the Assyrians, to overtake them. With this, Israel had become even more disobedient and corrupted in that they intermarried with these people and adopted most of their pagan cultures. The Samaritans were a mixed race of people, and they were hated by the Jews because of this cultural mixing. They built their own temple on Mount Gerizim, which caused further tension and hostility between the Jews and the Samaritans. As a result, the Jews regarded the Samaritans as ignorant, superstitious mongrels outside of God's favor. But aren't you glad that it doesn't matter what somebody else thinks about us? The Jews didn't like the Samaritans, but the Bible says that they couldn't even eat or touch anything that the Samaritans put their hands to. But in spite of all this, the Samaritans were still very much part of God's plan. As a matter of fact, Jesus specifically mentioned Samaria in Acts 1 and 8, where he tells his disciples, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Now, as mentioned, considering how this woman planned her trip to the well, it was unusual for her to run into anyone, let alone a man at the well. But this was no ordinary man sitting at the well. He was about to offer her water from his well, which would no doubt quench her thirst. There is nothing in this world that will satisfy the ravenous craving, thirst of people other than the water offered through Christ. God knows a person's thirst and he exposes it. When God wants you, he will find you anywhere. He doesn't care what you look like. He doesn't care what your past is like. He doesn't care about your education. As a matter of fact, he specializes in weirdos and rejects and freaks and messed up people and deranged people. He doesn't care about any of all of that. Despite all of our mishaps and mess-ups and inabilities, God has a plan for our lives. The question we must ask ourselves is, what water are we drinking? What things are we seeking satisfaction in? Do we trick ourselves into believing that this thing or that thing, this job or that job, this trip or that trip, this man or that woman, do we trick ourselves into believing that if we drink from the things of this world, we will be satisfied? If your answer is yes, then I submit to you that you are drinking the wrong water. Yes, you are. Notice the woman's response to Jesus' claim of water that will eternally quench her thirst. She says, "Give me this water." Those of us who are thirsting after that which cannot fulfill us must respond to Jesus in the same way. Give me this water. Give me this water. Jesus' answer to her is an outline for us as to how we can receive this living water. Number one, we've got to recognize who God is. Jesus says to this woman, if you knew the gift of God, we've got to know who God is. It is not enough to know of God. We've got to know who he is. We must come to the knowledge that God is love and that his love is a gift. It is our responsibility to let those who don't know him know that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. We must tell a dying world that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes on him shall not perish on. And then number 3, we then got to ask. We must ask. Verse 10 says, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. In other words, had you asked for it, he would have given it to us. You see, although God knows what we need, he is a gentleman. He will not force himself on us. He is just waiting for us to ask. Doesn't the Bible say, ask and it shall be given you? Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be opened unto you. Just like this woman. I believe this is the reason why I like this story so much. Because I can identify with this woman. As a matter of fact, this sermon was written some time ago. Lord kept bringing it back to me. I remember my sister Shai was in the emergency room. We had taken her there. And for some reason, Pastor Clark was down there. I don't even know why he was down there. But I said to Pastor Clark, you know, the Lord keeps giving me this woman at the well, and the woman at the well is a very familiar story. We've heard it preached so many times. And it's like, Lord, what else can we say about the well? Why do you keep bringing this to me? Why do you keep having me go back to John chapter 4, 6 through 15? Well, the Lord said, because I want you to recognize who you are. He said, you can identify with us. He said, you can come to terms with who you are. I'm going to keep bringing you back to who I am. Because I need you to let somebody know that just like that woman, I was thirsty. I was thirsting for those things that couldn't satisfy. You say, oh, Rita, you've been in church all your life.
Come on.
And I would say, you're right. From the time I was a little girl, my mama brought me to church. We would spend morning, Sunday school, morning, afternoon, evening service, Wednesday Bible study, Saturday choir rehearsal. We was always in church. Always there. So what are you talking about, Rita? What are you talking about? You was thirsty. You was always in church. You knew what was going on. You knew church etiquette. You knew what to say. And you knew how to say it. What are you talking about? You were thirsty. Well, I was in church, but the church wasn't in me. My heart was hard. I walked into church every single day. Every Sunday I was here, but the church was not in me. I can tell you all the rituals that we did in church. I can tell you all the traditions that we did in church, but the church wasn't in me. I